Hello and welcome to the Brodie Blueprint, the podcast designed to help college students and young professionals navigate their career paths. Each episode we sit down with industry experts from finance, business, sports, education and more to uncover their journeys, daily experiences and lessons they've learned along the way. Whether you're exploring career options, looking for networking advice, or just curious about different industries, this is the place for you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hi everybody, welcome back to episode 12 of the Brodie Blueprint. Today I'm joined by a multi-sport broadcaster, communications assistant and recent graduate of the University of North Florida, Mr. Adam Glover. Adam, welcome to the show, sir. How are you doing?
Great, and I'm honored and happy to be here, man.
Adam, I think you're going to be a great episode. Like we just touched on, this guy has already got sort of 13 pieces of experience on the resume. Obviously only graduated college last year, so I'm excited to see how you got on with all of them. Also, funny story, Adam's the third member of the Jumbo Shrimp to be on so far. We've also spoke to Scott and Matt already, so this is Adam. He's part of that team as well. We're going to dive right in, Adam. Obviously, you were a sports management major at the University of North Florida. Tell us a little bit about your time there and how you got started with sports media.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I played music, but I kind of, towards the end of my time, sort of lost the passion for it a little bit. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do going into college. Obviously, you kind of do the tours and stuff like that. But I went to UNF for a little bit and talked to some of the professors and realized they had this nice sport management program. And at that point, that's kind of where I was like, okay, I think I definitely want to work in the sport industry. I wasn't quite sure what I specifically wanted to do, but I knew I was like, all right, let's get into the program and just kind of see where it takes me. So that's why I picked UNF. But it was pretty early on in my college tenure. My mom kind of suggested, hey, do you want to try out sport broadcasting? And I was like, yeah, that could be an interesting idea. So I talked to the athletic department. The old SID, Brock Borgeson, gave me a pretty good shot to be able to start up fairly quickly. And that's sort of how this kind of wild ride started. And, the degree itself is more, again, tailored towards management and marketing. So there wasn't a whole lot throughout, I guess, the 4 years I was there that was towards communications or media or broadcasting or anything. But I still met some really cool people throughout the program and eventually just picked up a communications minor just to have some sort of background learning AP style and getting a little ahead on knowing how to do like the Adobe products, Premiere and Audition and stuff like that. But it was a good choice for me, obviously. But I would say it was really funny because, I showed up during COVID, August of 2020. So the majority of my 4 years, even though I was a part of the sport management program, I always tell myself I was really a part of the athletic department because I took almost all online classes for 4 years and then just worked my entire tenure. Yeah.
Amazing. Yes, that kind of makes sense how you managed to gain so much experience. So when did you actually first kind of get experience doing sports broadcasting? What was that like?
It was a lot of fun. It was February of 2021. Again, I was with Brock and him and I kind of had a plan for how we really wanted to do this. It started with the typical shadowing and then maybe sitting in to do some color commentary. But again, with COVID and staffing, and it didn't work out that way. And my first game was in February of 2021. We played Clemson for softball, which is a pretty big game to do. And I went back and re-listened to it a couple of weeks ago, and it's terrible. It is so bad. It doesn't even sound like me. But that was the first time that I ever kind of just got comfortable on the air and sort of saw how, things progressed. And it was we don't have it anymore, but it was a small in-house live stream service. It wasn't an ESPN Plus or anything or Flow Sports, but it at least got me my first rep. And I just spent the entire, I guess, spring semester doing primarily softball, but a little bit of baseball as well.
Amazing. What's it like leading up to that kind of debut performance? I spoke to Matt and Scott and kind of, I assume there's a lot of nerves involved, but they both said they didn't feel that nervous. What was it like for you building up to that first time?
When are you referring to just the first time I ever broadcasted?
Yeah, ever? Yeah. So the Clemson game. Yeah. What was that like?
Honestly, I don't remember too much of it. The few days prior to it though, is when I really started to kind of get used to being around Brock. And again, because it was COVID and staffing was so poor, him and I were testing out cameras and audio and running fiber and just trying to make sure it's all set up. And Clemson UNF wasn't the first game of the year. Brock actually did the first game of the year a couple of days prior. So I got to kind of sit in there and just watch how he did it. He's an SID, but he has a little broadcasting experience. So it wasn't obviously anything, I wasn't sitting in and watching like a crazy expert, but just watching Brock, who was comfortable being with a headset on in front of a camera and watching him do his thing. So it was nice to get a little bit of just kind of a heads up of how this is going to go. And I could be wrong, but I think I'm actually right about this. I think Brock was supposed to join me for that Clemson game, right, but it's crossover season, so there's softball and basketball and baseball going on, and he just inevitably ended up running around trying to do all these other things. And I was able to really get through it. I was nervous, but I just kind of leaned into my knowledge of, even though it was softball, my knowledge of baseball and just trying to keep up with the pace of the game a little bit. But it wasn't anything too crazy, to be honest with you. And honestly, I don't remember too much of it. I just wanted to kind of get through it.
Get through and get it done. No, amazing. That's really cool, man. Especially, Clemson are quite a notable school, so it's exciting that was your first one. Another thing we've spoken about in a lot of episodes is like a mentor figure or someone kind of just teaching you the ropes. Would you say Brock was kind of a mentor figure for you at UNF?
Yeah, I would, because not only that, but he was my first real sort of connection into sports. And he was an intern a while ago with the Iowa Cubs, and he just had, he kind of introduced me to also the media relations side of things. He wasn't a mentor in the sense of like I wanted to like cling to his side and we were doing everything together, but he was just this figure that introduced me to what this world was like, and was always there to give me some of the best advice that I could have, and just being more comfortable on the air, which was great. And he loved baseball. He played college baseball as well. So a lot of those early season, mid-season baseball games when there's a lot going on are some of him and I's favorite memories, because we're just chumming it up, sitting in an old press box, watching college baseball. Amazing. Like there's no care in the world.
Amazing. That's really cool, Adam. Before, obviously, 13 pieces of experience, so it's going to take us some time to get through all these. Before we touch on that, I want to get into, obviously, networking is kind of why this podcast started, why I started it. What's your experience like with networking? Is it something you've become, used to? Is it something you do regularly, or how did you get started with networking?
Yeah, it's honestly the reason as to why that I have all the experience that I do at this point, because I learned very early on, and it's honestly probably my best piece of advice is this industry is just built pretty much on relationships and who you know and who the person knows. And so just shooting emails early was the biggest thing, and just reaching out to people. And a lot of the experience that I have, while there's the fair share of seasonals or full times or stuff like that, are freelance work. So just reaching out to an SID or setting up a phone call with an athletic director has put me in a fairly good position here, because not only do I know who these people are now and they know who I am, but it allows me to get some great reps in some other sports. I've only done 4 or 5 sports: baseball, softball, minimums, basketball, football, like the big ones. But you don't need to be a full-time employee at a university or for a team or something like that in order to get experience and get reps and get, if you're a writer, and get some sort of like samples or something like that. I've been able to do it based off of networking a little bit and just reaching out to people. So I started very early on, and I would recommend other people do it. And I would also recommend, your professors are great, but sometimes it's also best to get away from where you're at. Reach out to the people that are hours away or in a different state, and because everybody's different and everybody's got they all have different backgrounds, but they also all have different opinions on how you should do things. So if you stick around to just the people that you're maybe a little close with, the people in your student radio or your degree or something like that, I feel like it also could really close things for you. So I think when it comes to networking, you should just talk to as many people as you can.
Definitely. I think as well, for me, and it sounds like for you, networking doesn't really intimidate me. I don't mind messaging somebody and them not getting back to me. It doesn't really bother me at all. But I think there's a lot of people, young people, college students, maybe even high school students, who are kind of not necessarily intimidated, but worried that they might say something that might not come across great and they might get ignored. What would you say to people who don't know how to start networking or just want to get started but don't know what to say?
I mean, honestly, I did 8 of them this morning, 8 emails,
Right.
just reaching out to people. And they all can be fairly similar to the most point. Introduce yourself, introduce where you're at and what you want to accomplish. And you can throw something in there about how you think whoever you're emailing can help you accomplish that. But
Yeah.
you're right to where that you're probably not going to get a response to the majority of them. I've probably sent in the last 2 weeks 25 emails. I think I've gotten a response for 4, you know. This morning I got a response for 1 of the 8. So it's honestly just, email's great because, in a way because it's not over the phone or a text message or an in-person meeting, there's not really like a face to it in a lot of ways. It's just a starter. So if you're ever worried about that face-to-face meeting, shoot an email to start, because you're going to outline exactly what you want to say. And if you don't get a response, honestly, they're probably not going to remember you. They might, which is why I think you should always make sure that your emails are really nice in your introductions in case they do. But a lot of times, people are busy. Think about if you're trying to get into college athletics. Baseball season just ended, or at least the College World Series is going on. So most SIDs are either exhausted and they want time away, or they're already in full gear for football come the fall. So they just got stuff going on. So my thing is it just never hurts to just send an email, or leave a voicemail or something like that. And if they don't get back to you, I've always seen it as don't treat it as they don't want you, or you're not good enough, or they don't have any interest. Just treat it as you just didn't get through to them this time. You can always try again, or you can always try a different outlet.
100%. And if it makes anyone feel better, I've got 500 LinkedIn connections just now. I've messaged all of them. We've only got 12 episodes of the podcast. So it definitely is a lot of averages. If you message enough people, I think some of them will reply. So I definitely agree, Adam. That's great advice. I want to start picking at some of your roles here. I've got a big list over here. Sports broadcasting intern and broadcasting and media relations intern. That's a couple of what sound like really, really great internships. Talk to us a little bit about how you got them in the first place and what you learned while you were doing them.
So the sport broadcasting internship was with the Bethesda Big Train, who are a summer college team up in Bethesda, Maryland, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. And my first 2 years, so I would say 2021 and 2022, I was kind of lost with broadcasting a lot. I was just trying to get reps, didn't have a ton of connections and people that I knew. So I knew that if I wanted to make it, I had to kind of branch out and try to get some internships. So I applied for that job in Bethesda and was able I was offered the job in November of 2022 for the summer of 2023. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, I would say.
Right.
It was the first time flying out of state. Well, actually I didn't fly, I drove, but being out of state and just meeting new people from a different area and meeting new broadcasters and creative content people and GMs and assistant GMs. Michael Michaud, who was the GM of Bethesda, I text him all the time. Thank you. Every time something happens career-wise, I always send him a message, because even though he wasn't the only person to do an interview with me, he was actually the only person that, I guess, fall to offer me something. So I've always given him a lot of credit to giving me an opportunity and taking a chance on just this random kid from Jacksonville, Florida, 10, 11 hours away by car from Washington, D.C., Maryland, and giving me that opportunity. And it was a great summer. We had a director of broadcasting, Harrison Myers, who came in and helped redo a lot of the broadcast setup and really put us in a good position to succeed. And I had a really nice broadcast partner, Eli Kleinman, who's the USC women's basketball radio play-by-play broadcaster, and he's having a lot of fun out in California right now. So we were a great team, and the team was really good too. They won the championship, which doesn't happen often. And I've always credited, though, Bethesda to really kind of getting my foot in the door into the industry, because once kind of the application and interview process came around the next fall, I was getting a lot more looks and a lot more phone calls and interviews. And but then I went to Jacksonville. I wanted to not get away from summer ball. I really enjoyed summer ball, but I felt like I could take another step up. And I knew there was more that I could learn. So I applied for summer ball, but and I got some offers and considered a few things, but I really wanted to try to get into minor league baseball, because at this point I knew for a fact that baseball was the way I wanted to go. It also has some of the most opportunities as well, because there's so many minor league teams, less than there were 10 years ago. But, you got one team has 4 or 5 affiliates, and there's a lead broadcaster and a 2. So it was a good area for me to kind of address, and a good field for me to want to pursue. So I actually met Scott and Matt in September of 2023, excuse me, and just shadowed them, just to kind of see what this industry was like, and from their perspective as people who have been in it for a while. And that further solidified sort of just wanting to do it. I had great conversations with them. They clearly liked me pretty well. And Scott offered me an opportunity to come back the next year to be an intern. And sort of similar to my comms assistant position this year with them, I just went into it with sort of no expectations, and just decided to bring what I had to the table and just see what happens. And it was some of the most fun I've ever had in my entire life over those 6 months there. Matt and Scott are both incredible people. I mean, you've talked to them. They're
two great
filled
guys.
with wisdom, and they are funny as heck to be around. And there's always, they're great too, because they always make it clear that they're not experts. But, for me, as somebody trying to get into the industry, I always learn something new from them all the time. They give me some piece of advice, or I just, kind of nonchalantly look over and see something that I've never seen before, the way they say something. Had a fantastic 6 months, and then they promoted me to the comms assistant position that I'm in now. But they both internships in Bethesda and Jacksonville were just some of the most fun I've ever had in my life.
Amazing. It's really great to hear that you can have, 2 internships that are actually really rewarding. I think a lot of people can maybe have the idea that being an intern means you just go and grab coffee, you reply to emails all day. So it is really great to hear that you had 2 experiences that were really worthwhile. Before we circle back to the Jumbo Shrimp and what you're doing now, I had a question that sort of came up a little bit ago. You've broadcasted and spoke over a lot of different sports. Is there any key differences you found between different sports and when you're broadcasting?
Baseball's so different compared to other things because it's a lot slower. I've done baseball TV and radio, so it's just filling up some air on the radio, which is I actually find to be quite easy. I know a lot of people don't, but I think it's because I started in baseball and then moved to some of the quicker sports. So I've always found that filling up the time to speak, and even in TV, you kind of let the game breathe a little bit more, and you can let people watch, but there's still a lot of time to kind of chum it up with whoever you're next to. So it's definitely different than a few of the other sports. Football and basketball are a lot quicker, especially basketball. I got my first taste of basketball last fall. And I remember I do women and men's basketball at the College of Coastal Georgia, which is just an NAIA school, Southeast Georgia. I think it's the perfect spot for me because I know basketball so much less than I know baseball or football. So it's a great place for me to just kind of work out the kinks a little bit and test things out and see just get some good, some good reps and some good tape. But I remember the first basketball game, I did women's first and was watching it. And I was like, oh, this is great. A lot of fun. It's a little faster pace. The girls are great. It's awesome. And then they did the men's game probably about 40 minutes later. And it was like watching a NASCAR race at first, how quickly they would go back and forth. And the first minute, I was like, holy crap. Like, I gotta stay on top of this because I mean, the girls were fast too, but the guys just, I didn't expect it initially. You just kind of think you're going to tip it up in the air. So-and-so gets the first possession and they're kind of walk a little bit slowly and then people start running around, but it was insane. So you don't have as much time to really delve into stories or stats because it is quickly moving. But you still always have that ready to go. You have spotting boards or little notes or your live stats up or something like that. And then football is also pretty fast paced, not nearly to the amount as basketball. But I've always loved football because I've always felt football more than any other sport. You can really build up the intensity of this game a little bit more because it is a more physical sport, and it's such a popular sport in America now. It is by far the most popular sport, and even college football is it's week one's like a holiday for some people. So there's just a way that you can build up the energy a little bit more when you do football, in my opinion, than a few other sports, because it's kind of wired in people's heads that this is college football, this is going to be great, this is going to be exciting. But I hope I didn't kind of go off the tracks a little bit too much there. But there is some differences in just terms of pacing and prep a little bit, and just what you have to do to kind of fill some space. I've done radio and TV for football. There are some differences, but because it's so fast paced, again, there isn't as much dead air to fill in as like a baseball radio, which we do, which again, like I do all the time over at the Jumbo Shrimp. So even then, transitioning from radio to TV and back to radio hasn't actually been too much of a challenge for me early on. And I think also it's because I had a background in TV to start at UNF, that for some people, TV is a little more difficult because they're used to talking so much. So I think going the other direction actually helped me more than if I went radio to TV.
Radio to TV. I've got a couple of questions from there. First of all, is one that me and Matt talked about. Being on TV, I think, as someone who's not been on TV, someone that obviously consumes a lot of TV, it sounds like a really, really exciting thing. When Matt spoke about it, he just kind of like was so casual, so nonchalant, like it was really easy. What was it like getting your first reps on TV for you?
It was, the first time that I was on TV with UNF, it was fine. We actually didn't have an in-booth camera for a little bit there. So it was, again, I actually think that sort of helped me out, because now instead of doing my intro just talking to myself, I was just talking to the camera, and you kind of get in this pattern in your head of how you want to do everything. There's certain ways that you build up an intro, who's playing, where you're at, stuff like that. But the first few times that I did kind of on camera over at UNF would have probably been a couple of years ago. It's a little nerve-wracking when you first do it, but the reality of it is you're just, instead of talking and kind of looking around, you're just talking to like a camera, and there's nobody most likely operating the camera because it's inside of the booth. It's usually attached to a window, or it's just set up somewhere. So it is very casual. Just, hey, here we are. Here's my color analyst, and I've thankfully always had wonderful people up in the production room as well at UNF. Ethan, who's our broadcast manager, is fantastic. And then Kyle, who was the old one, was also amazing too. So they're always kind of talking in your ears sometimes, as well as like okay, here's the graphic. You cannot look at the camera anymore. The reality of it is I don't know if Matt or Scott told you this, but the reality of it is you're only on camera for probably about 20 seconds.
Yeah.
So it's really nothing crazy at all, because you'll do an intro that you won't be on camera for, then it'll cut inside to a camera usually on you, and then you're only maybe talking for like 15, 20 seconds, and then B-roll goes. So it's really nothing, too crazy to kind of get amped up for. I don't have a TV background in the sense of sitting and like reading off a teleprompter or reading the news. It's just not kind of the career out, it's not really what I had interest in. So I'm sure that is a totally different ball game, and something that's probably a little more nerve-wracking. But if you're on camera and the sport, at least for me, it just kind of flows pretty naturally.
It's cool. It's interesting to hear that, from your side behind the camera, it sounds so simple, when there's probably people watching and like, wow, this is amazing, that this broadcaster's doing like a hell of a job, and you're sitting there thinking this is the easiest thing in the world. So it's interesting to hear it from your side of you. Before we get back to the Jumbo Shrimp and what you're doing now, something you've talked about a lot is being able to chum it up with someone in the broadcasting booth, or UNF friends that you have that you got on with and you could talk in the commentary booth. Does it make a big difference having a broadcasting partner that you get on with and someone that you're comfortable talking to, as opposed to maybe someone you don't really know very well?
Oh, absolutely. Getting to know people is on the outside of broadcast too allows for the broadcast, in my opinion, to be a lot better because you have that sort of experience with them. So it's always easier to chum it up with somebody who Matt Davis and I did our first ESPN broadcast together earlier this year because we'd only been doing the Jumbo Shrimp and stuff like that, and it was great because we had a year and a half of a relationship built up together, so we could play off of each other and we knew things. As a play-by-play broadcaster, when you have a color analyst, it's always your responsibility to kind of bring them into the conversation a lot. Sometimes the really great color analysts will hear the dead air and will jump in on their own sometimes, but it's fairly kind of simple in a way to just include them. You're there to talk baseball, you're there to talk football. There's always times where it's a blowout and you kind of bring in the outside world a little bit, but setting up sort of conversations, especially in baseball, in my opinion, it can be fairly simple because since there is a lot of dead air, you can set it up and let the guy next to you talk for 20 seconds before the next pitch comes in or something like that. But I would 100% say that it's much easier to do it with somebody that you have a relationship with. But I will also say that more times than not, especially at like an ESPN plus level or something a little lower, more times than not, you're working with people that you've never met. I think the last 3 ESPN broadcasts I've done, or the last 4, have all been with completely different people. Richard Miller, who's the voice of the UNF Ospreys, has always been great, and him and I have a great relationship and can really just talk and talk. But then you have guys who are, coming in from Tampa or just freelancing that you don't really know. But I would say just, it's important in the little 30 minutes to 90 minutes you have before a game to just kind of get to know the person a little bit. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but just who they are and essentially why they're there.
That's nice. But it makes a big difference. Just even like you said there, that's 30 to 90 minutes where you can just kind of get more comfortable around each other a bit as well. So that's a really cool insight and something that sounds like it makes your job a lot easier. I want to circle back before we sort of draw to a close. Communications assistant with the Jumbo Shrimp just now. Tell us a little bit about your role there, maybe a little day in the life, what you're doing on game days, what you're doing on off days, and kind of what that role entails for you.
Yeah, my role is essentially to really just add as an extra support beam for Scott and Matt. Just another person in there that can really help them out because they have incredibly busy jobs. They both also have sales jobs on top of all the broadcasting and media relations activity too. So having somebody in there that can step in for them if they absolutely need it. So my job, really is just being almost ready to go whenever they need it, whether it's something as small as making copies or something as big as calling a baseball game. My day usually starts probably around 11 o'clock in the morning, to be honest with you. We'll roll in there. My first responsibility is always to kind of handle the lineup situation because one thing we do is we always, you always kind of type up the lineups and print them out and distribute them to all the coaches and make sure guest services has them. So I'll spend, it seems like an insane amount of time, an hour and a half, but usually the lineups aren't up when you're there or something like that, but just kind of editing it, The game notes usually is an area where Scott and Matt will kind of handle it, but I'll assist with it from time to time, getting them numbers or stuff like that. We have great interns as well that work with us, so I help the interns out tremendously too. We'll do stuff like just interviews pregame as well. I did a couple of them last week with a few infielders for Jacksonville. Now that we have interns, there's also kind of the added responsibility of, just being around them and helping them interact with the players too, and just kind of being this middle ground for them. Hey, you want to do an interview with this guy? Let me go ask him for you and stuff like that. And then it's for the last sort of hour or so, once we kind of have everything sort of done, and this all is in the span really of like over 8 hours. There's a lot. Right, okay. It seems like a little bit, but it's actually a lot that goes into it because there's also meetings and there is some times where things can get a little bit quiet around the ballpark. But I'll kind of get my prep in because I'm a part of the pregame shows that we do consistently every night with Matt. So I'll get some prep in to just kind of figure out what we want to talk about. We'll do the pregame show, and then during the game, we really have 2 sort of areas that are sort of my responsibility: the social media and then the press releases that we release at the end of every game. Sometimes I'll let some of the interns kind of help out with that or get some reps in as well. But it's keeping updates on Twitter and Instagram, getting highlights and making posts. And then, we always send out a nice game recap at the end of every game as well. So one of my favorite videos, one of our interns, Maurice, created, is he'll do like a time-lapse video where he'll set up a camera and just kind of film the press box during a game day. And it's pretty funny because I would say 80% of it, I'm not even turned facing the game. I'm turned around like editing something or helping them with something. And that's kind of, and then once it's over, you look over everything, you upload everything, and then you do it again the next day. The only time that's a little bit different is, for example, like today, when the team is on the road, we only travel one broadcaster. Okay. So my responsibility usually is, and I'll do it here in a little bit, if we have some sort of release that needs to go out, I'll handle it. Like I have to write a feature story here in a bit. And then it's my responsibility to produce the games on the radio over at ESPN 690 here in Jacksonville. So for about 5 hours a day, I'll go over to the radio station and press all the buttons and make sure Matt's on the air or Scott's on the air and make sure that it's going out and everybody can listen to it. So it's nothing too crazy when the team is away. But those home series can be exhausting from time to time.
Sounds like some busy long days for you, I have to say.
Yeah, it is. They're every day is a 12-hour day, and then you just hope that it doesn't get any longer than that. Is the way that I think of it in my head.
Amazing. I saw on your LinkedIn as well. Congratulations, Jared, 2025 season broadcasting debut. How was that?
Thank you. I appreciate it. That was last week, and it was a ton of fun. I had no expectations going into it again, and then I was completely blown away because not only was Matt, not that I didn't expect him not to be, but he was fantastic and super supportive. But the players and coaches were also just awesome to be with, and they were super supportive too. A bunch of them came up to me and congratulated me. The manager, David Carpenter, one of the coolest gifts I've ever gotten in my life, gave me the lineup card from the night prior and signed it at the top and wrote like a really nice congratulations note on top of it too. They were awesome, and it was just kind of gave me that little taste of what my future could be if I want to continue on this path. It was just a ton of fun, and I had my family in the building with it as well, so to be able to do it in front of them was just so cool.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. So what's the future like for Adam Glover? Are you just going to hard at work, head down, and keep doing the same kind of things, see where you end up, or what's the plan?
My goal is to finally get that first real broadcasting job after this as well. So the off season always has question marks. You don't know how it's going to go, but I always just try to keep myself busy. I got the 2 football things going on. I got the basketball job as well. So at least trying multiple times a week in the off season to get some sort of rep is really, really kind of the goal for me. And then we'll just, I guess, see how the off season goes and just see where I'm at in April of next year.
Amazing. Adam, we've been full of wisdom and full of insight. We're going to get to our last little segment here. What's your top 2 or 3 pieces of advice for people who are trying to start out as well?
My first one, I kind of talked about it earlier, was just, especially for people who are in college or maybe in student radio or student media, just breaking out and going and doing something else for another school. Just because, you're a radio let's just take UNF for example, just because that's my alma mater. Just because you're a communications student at UNF and you get opportunities to write there or to do a few segments on like some student TV or something, doesn't mean that you can't go do it somewhere else as well. I'm of the person where, and I'm definitely in the minority with this, in my opinion, where I don't have a problem sometimes losing a little bit of money to go and get a rep or a sample somewhere. So if that means paying for a quick flight to go fly out of state to go call a game and then come back, of course I'm losing a little bit of money, but that's a connection that I just built, and that's a rep that I have that I can send out to people in the future. Now, I don't think it's smart to move to the other side of the state, or excuse me, to the other side of the country and then just start, freelancing over there. But, I'm all for the 4-hour drives to go do games, or I'm all for the 2-hour drives that you don't get paid too well for. So I think it's just, this is the time, especially if you're in college, to do that. You don't want to have to be doing that when you're in your late 20s and you have a wife and maybe a kid on the way or something like that. But get out, do whatever you can, because you look at your resume and it'll be great that you got your like student radio or your student newspaper experience, but if you have that and then a couple other things below it and a few other references, not only does it make your resume look nicer from like a design standpoint, just it looks full and complete, but it also gives the future employer just more people and more questions and people they can talk to. And then another one that I would give is, actually, I guess it's sort of a two-parter. The first is, not everybody's going to have your best interests in mind. It's a very competitive field, and people are going to want to keep you around if they like you. But if you don't want to be there, or you think you have greater aspirations, or you have a better opportunity, do it. Like, don't be afraid to, again, it's a relationship industry, so you always want to keep people in your good graces. But if your boss doesn't want you to leave and get a better opportunity, in my opinion, they're not a very good boss. And then the last piece of advice I would give is, because everybody in media has a different background, everybody also has a different opinion of how to do stuff. Just because, and you might have to adapt to certain situations. If you, like, for example, let's say I worked for, a minor league team prior to Jacksonville. I could have a way that team wrote the game recap, but Jacksonville might have a different way for me. They want to write the recap. So that's something you might have to adapt to. But when you're in the future and you're in charge, you don't have to just stick to some person's advice. You can kind of pick through everybody's sort of advice and see what you like, see what you don't like, and then go from there. Scott and Matt will always tell our future interns and the current ones, it's their opinion. It's, especially if it's like a feature story, the one thing they'll always make clear is, this is your story. If you don't want me to edit it, fine. But here are my little tidbits, and here's how I would do it. But you never have to take the advice. So if you're in the future, always be open to learning new things and new advice. But if you don't like it and you like somebody else's advice, don't be afraid to just pick what you want to do.
Amazing. Adam, thank you so much. That's a lot of wisdom and a lot of great advice. I really appreciate you coming on, my man.
Again, grateful that I got to do it with you. I really appreciate it.
Amazing. Guys, new episodes every Wednesday. Any updates, go out on Instagram and TikTok. That is at the Brodie Blueprint, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks again. Well, that's all for today, folks. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and were also able to gain some valuable insights into a potential career. Please head over to Instagram and TikTok and follow us. That's the Brodie Blueprint. And also don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube as well. If you guys have any guests that you want to see on the podcast, or any industries that you want to see guests appear from, please let us know. Until next time, guys. See you later.